But he made a comment that was fascinating. He said, of all these people, the scariest guy, the guy would not want to run into in a back alley, the guy that could just kill me, he's like an alien, this guy named George S. Pogosich. And I'm just like, I got to look into this. Hey guys, in today's video, my guest is Rokas from the Martial Arts Journey. Make sure to check out his YouTube channel and check out the other videos I did with him titled How the Martial Arts Journey Began, talking about his time he started training in Aikido, and also is Rokas the Anti-Steven Skull. But in this video, we're going to talk about pressure testing in Aikido. We're going to talk about if traditional martial arts should evolve, and then also Systema and the martial arts wizard George Pogosich. That's a really fascinating part of this discussion. If you want to punch harder, make sure to check out George's course, by the way, georgeforce.net. I'll link it in the description below. Also, make sure to stay until the end because I'm going to share a very amusing story related to a miscommunication and how those things can really affect your entire life. But anyway, if you like this kind of content, please help support the channel by hitting the like button, subscribing, and sharing the video. Do you think, like in general, like if we're speaking in general, because of like the philosophy and the harmonious nature of Aikido, do you think they should, in general, pressure test? Or do you think that like, no, that just shouldn't be part of Aikido?
It's a great question again, and it's a tough one to navigate because now my mindset comes of, oh, actually, whatever I say will impact some people. So I'll try to quickly look at both sides. So first of all, personally, I'm an advocate of saying that Aikido doesn't necessarily have to spar and pressure test. I think it can be like kind of a soft version, soft martial art like Tai Chi. And even Tai Chi these days, some people claim it's effective in fighting, and that makes a mess. But a lot of Tai Chi, it's just like old people in the park.
Yeah.
Well, that's the cliche, but you know what I mean. So most of it does not present itself as something more than this kind of exercise for your well-being, and that's cool and that's awesome. And I think if Aikido would identify itself and promote itself as we're not self-defense whatsoever, even then, I mean, they could teach some self-defense, but let's say they're really clear that we're not teaching self-defense, this is self-development, etc. I think it would be great. But even then, I think, and this would have been an expansion of that answer, but I think then they would have to also re-educate themselves a little bit too. And it's a long subject, but I'll make it short. That spiritual aspect as well, it's more complicated than I think some people make it. Aikido, I think, still lives a bit in that narrative of if you have a black belt, you're a sensei. That means you're a black belt at everything, business, marriage, etc. And it doesn't apply to all senseis, but my sensei, my second sensei was, and actually kind of both, they were a little bit like that. They were like they didn't look like it, but they were like these characters from classical kung fu movies, the white dude, the wise dude with the beard, where they're a kung fu master, but they also give you life advice, and they're kind of they know everything. Right. And they were like in character and what they spoke to me and how they related to people, they were kind of like that. And I think that's not really good because honestly, they weren't educated in psychology or marriage counseling, or I don't know, some cognitive behavioral therapy. I think Aikido could completely devote itself to being a martial art which is not about self-defense, but I think then they should evolve as a self-development practice. But I also don't judge people who want to take their Aikido and be like, okay, let's spar with this, let's use it. And I respect it. I especially respect Remy. I respect, Wolf and the Wolfman for doing it. And I fully support them. But aside from that, aside from giving my support to them, I do still question, it's like, why, that question is still on my mind. Why would you specifically train Aikido and go through the trouble of pressure testing and making it efficient when there are other martial arts which are already doing that job? And so that's the question which is difficult to answer.
Yeah,
Do
and
you
that
know?
that's a good question, and I'm sure you'll, explore that further.
Yeah.
Um, but here's a question related to that. So, what do you think about like martial arts systems, how they're basically they are what they are. It's almost like tradition for tradition's sake. Like, do you think they should implement a few new things into Aikido? Like, for example, like the Krav Maga symbol is essentially like an open circle because they're
Mm.
always willing to take new techniques or
Mm.
evolve the techniques and get rid of things that don't work. That's what I like about that system. But I feel like a lot of other martial arts systems, it's just like it is what it is. It's always been this way, and it almost seems like they always want to keep it that way. Do you think there's any benefit at all to keeping it like that and just like closed off from like adding techniques? Like, here's the thing: if it's easier to punch somebody in the face, I mean, I know Aikido is more,
Yeah.
peaceful and defense oriented,
Sure.
but why not do a couple basic things? Or do you think that would be negative and just takes away from Aikido? Because if even if it's just not marketed and portrayed as a self defense system, there's still going to be elements and people may have to use it and may want to use it. So you think they should evolve it at least a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I'd love for that to happen, and I think it's a bit crazy that Aikido's because again, this is a bit generalizing, but the general tendency does seem to be in Aikido to preserve. Like there are some schools and some organizations which are very clear about that. They want to do exactly what the founder did, and there's actually like a whole straight lineage from it. Uh, so historically, there was the founder of Aikido, Morihiro Shiba. His one of his top students, Morihiro Saito, he lived with him and trained with him for the last years of his life, and he took over the school in a forest or village, which he then continued to lead. And his motto was essentially preserve what the founder did. And then his top students, including some Western guys, it's all a system called Ivama for those who are inclined to know. So they all took the same, and they said, our job is to preserve exactly what the founder taught. And I think that some like that particular style is very has very opinionated about it. They're like, we have to preserve, period. But that kind of mindset is common in Aikido. It's just like let's do what the founder did. And I think part of that comes because there are a lot of legends about the Aikido's founder. He's a very legendary guy, and to good things and to bad things. Like there's stories of him dodging bullets. There's stories of him, raising a rock that 12 people, or like a tree stump that 12 people couldn't raise. Like there's a lot of crazy stories with him. So he's kind of this mystical legendary figure, and he's portrayed as an undefeatable fighter, like the best that ever
Mm.
lived. That's the Osensei, great teacher name. I think that's where it comes from. And so there's a lot of people in Aikido think that believe that he was the top of what's possible. Like there's even one story which I remember. So a friend of mine who's not a friend of mine anymore, he hates my guts, but he was a high-ranking Aikido instructor, and he trained with one of the top guys, Chiba Sensei, who's really hardcore. Like his Aikido. I never trained with him, but I heard like there's a bench in doing seminars where that bench was for people who got broken arms and broken bones,
Really?
whatever. Like that was part of, because they trained so hardcore. And so the friend of mine, he's actually from Siberia, so he was pretty badass himself, kind of a fighter type. He went there, trained, and he said that Chiba Sensei, the combative guy, the combative Aikido guy, so to speak, he said I think the story was he took out a hair from his head and said, "You see this hair? Like I'm not worth even one hair of Osensei, of the founder of Aikido." So that's the mentality. Like we're never gonna be as good as the founder, and I think that's one of the reasons why everyone is so stuck at, let's continue to do exactly what he did, because we will never reach that level. Hopefully
Mm.
we'll reach the level that he reached. But I think, logically thinking, I think that's crazy, because there's a lot of Aikido attacks like this straight cut from the head and stuff which is outdated. It's not relevant to modern times, and I think martial arts evolved past what martial arts were back then. So to preserve it, this is a long-winded answer, but I think it would be great if Aikido, even if they would say, okay, this is the traditional curriculum, and here, like some BGG schools that do that, where it's like, okay, this is some self-defense stuff. Like if you get on the ground, kick the knee, stand up in this way. Like they teach some self-defense stuff so that people who go into competition wouldn't get completely hooked on the competitive stuff. They would realize, okay, this is the self-defense and this is the cake of and candies of BJJ. So I think for Aikido to have a curriculum where it's like, this is traditional, and here we train a little bit like this is a simple parry from a strike, and this is a technique from a strike. That would be great. I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, no, that approach actually makes a lot of sense. That's pretty cool. I was almost thinking too that it would make sense with Aikido, maybe just pressure test, or maybe people should only pressure test once they're at a black belt level, right? Like
Yeah.
that seems like that. It's like there's no point pre black belt, I wouldn't think, because Aikido is one of those things where, like, if you think about return on investment, it seems like there's got to
Mm.
be. I know you said you could get a black belt in 3 or 4 years, but here's the thing. I mean, you take a few weeks of kickboxing or somebody, like, you could hurt
Mm.
someone. I mean, granted, you're not going to
Yeah.
be a professional fighter, but you could hurt someone. Like a few weeks of Aikido, like, I don't even think you're not going to be able to even defend yourself. I mean, you
Yeah.
might later, but not in a few weeks with that kind of stuff. It's just, I've always kind of thought, now, the more I think about it, talking with Dan and Remy, and other people, that, like, I even had discussions with Systema,
Mm.
like on a martial arts food pyramid. I don't think anybody should necessarily start with Aikido, or especially Systema. They should start with other things, and they could
Mm.
lead them up to this, which I think it could be used, but you got to be at such a high level. Now, with
Right.
that said, based on all your other training in your journey, your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I know you're doing kickboxing now. Do you think you can actually start utilizing some of the Aikido techniques, since you have other techniques from other fighting styles? Or do you think, like, at least for you, not obviously speaking to everybody, you're like, do you think, no, it's just not for me? Or maybe, like, maybe I could actually utilize this, you know, at certain points in a fight or something?
Yeah. That's slowly starting to come. And for a long time, well, considerably long, I was kind of resisting that because a lot of people, especially my viewers from the channel, they're like, oh, you should be the guy to make Aikido work and you should like put
Make
Aikido
Aikido
stuff.
great again, man. That'll be a
Right,
series of
right,
future videos, right? If
exactly.
you start implementing it on top of your BJJ and kickboxing.
I could go that way. Yeah, sorry. I could
You'll
go
come
that way,
full circle and back to,
Right.
hey, Aikido's the shit, man.
Yeah. Yeah, I considered that and I realized like even like it's a quick deviation, but a lot of not necessarily a lot of people. I just get that impression because I get hooked on those comments. But some people think that the only reason I'm publishing videos is for money, and they think the way I decide what videos to do is to make money, and it's
Yeah, I've
like,
heard that criticism. I mean, so
yeah,
YouTube is your job, though, right? Like, this is
yes,
what you do full time and you devote it to.
that is true, but here's kind of an argument which can counter argument that I there was a point where I realized if YouTube was for me just about money, like if I would be like, okay, I don't care about anything, I don't care about integrity, I don't care about whatsoever anything, it's all about money for me. One of the best things I could have done is stayed with Aikido and continued to train other martial arts and make it work. Because then, first of all, there's a big demand for that. A lot of people are interested in that. People would follow that. People ask for that. Then I could become the guy, the top guy in the world to do that. Eventually, for years, I could do workshops, I could do seminars, I could create DVDs of here's how Aikido works in BJJ, etc. I could like that could have been a good business model, but that wasn't really the way I wanted to go. I didn't feel like that's true for me.
Yeah, I would be
And
honest. Yeah, sure.
right, and there's also one thing which I listen to. I do like to listen to suggestions from top people, and one of the suggestions which is out there is that when you start combat sports after traditional martial arts, that the people, and I heard multiple stories of these, the people who are trying to still hold on to their previous martial art usually start slow, like they're getting in their own way because they're not learning and listening to what the instructor is giving them. They're like, how do I implement my Aikido technique here? They're
Hmm.
not really taking the
Interesting.
lessons in.
I mean, that
And
makes
so
sense.
I really didn't want to be that guy. So I made sure that for as long as I can, I'll hold back from using my Aikido. I'll hold back from trying to squeeze it in, like squeeze a, a square into round peg hole. And so that went on for a while, but only recently I started to feel like, I guess I'm starting to feel comfortable, and I'm not saying I'm very good, but I'm starting to feel comfortable in grappling, striking. Like I'm not stressful in it anymore. I'm not panicking it and not knowing what to do. So now I feel comfortable where I can, cover myself, eat some punches, and decide what to do. Or same thing in a grappling situation, I can take a breather, think a strategy. And now I think I start to notice these points where I'm like, oh, actually, you know what? I could do an Aikido technique here. So that's finally starting to come, and I see the potential in it. And I think the more time will pass, I will be interested to try it and explore it. And
Interesting.
so yeah, that's kind of on my plate. But that's at the same time, that's not a priority. It's not like, oh, now finally all of my Aikido training is going to come to fruition. It's more like I want to practice the stuff which is already proven to work, and sometimes I'll play with the stuff I already know. So that's kind of my perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you very well may evolve not like trying to implement it necessarily, but it just like becoming part of like you might just start doing that. I mean, if you've been doing it for 15 years, it might just come naturally where it's just like, oh, wait a minute, I'm just starting to do this because,
Hmm.
not even consciously thinking about it, it just came in the middle like some of the other stuff. I mean, who knows? Maybe that's how you evolve. But it's interesting when you talk about like sparring and you're okay eating punches and stuff. I think that's a big thing of the martial arts. Like,
Hmm.
and I've always noticed this from sparring before. Usually, like getting hit in the head or the face, it's never. I mean, granted, I'm not taking just sitting there and someone's hit me as hard as they can, but it's generally never as bad as you think. It's like,
Hmm.
it actually wasn't that bad. And
Yeah.
I think like that's something a lot of people need to experience where because then you get rid of the fear. It's interesting. So again, just going with how my YouTube videos are kind of like going like on a certain path and
Hmm.
kind of like why we're even talking, but
Yeah.
with Dan the Wolfman, who I had on my channel, I got a couple of videos with him. He brought this guy named George S. Pogasic to my
Hmm.
attention, which I made a video on called Martial Arts Wizards, because Dan had sparred with all these like UFC heavyweight champs, light heavyweight champs,
Hmm.
Lyoto Machida, Cain Velasquez, etc. But he made a comment that was fascinating. He said,
I'm more scared of George than any UFC heavyweight champ I ever sparred.
of all these people, the scariest guy, the guy would not want to run into in a back alley, the guy that could just kill me, he's like an alien, this guy named George S. Pogasic. And I'm just like, I got to look into this.
He is the one.
Long story short, I've been talking to George. I've talked to him several times on the phone and
Hmm.
even already put up a video with me and him discussing things. And he is a very interesting guy. But again, he's like, he got into Systema
Hmm.
like in the 90s, but he had
Hmm.
already been training forever in judo and boxing and salat, a lot of stuff. And then he got into Systema and he's refining that and kind of evolving that to his own thing. And some of the concepts that he discussed with me and his way of thinking, I'm like, this guy's like from the future. I mean, you may even want to have him on your channel sometime,
Yeah.
but I'm just like, this guy is so advanced and expert, and it's just a different way to think about things. But being the open-minded person I am, I've always had an open mind. Like I know a lot of people will trash not only Aikido but Systema, and I don't necessarily know what your thoughts are on Systema, but I've always been, there's got to be something here. But the way you see it on the internet, and here's the thing with Systema, there's no rank system. So
Hmm.
you could train Systema for a day, you could train it for 10 years. You're just like a Systema guy.
Yeah.
You could
Right.
have that title. So I could do Systema for 2 weeks and say I'm a Systema guy, get my ass kicked, and then people will be like, "Hey, Systema sucks,"
Hmm.
But so that's the problem with Systema. There's a lot of guys saying they're Systema guys. They may or may not be, or they may be a Systema guy that just sucks. You know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and it's hard to visualize too because it's so non-telegraphic. You're not loading up punches. It's like we're so used to seeing things in the UFC or in movies of how things
Hmm.
should work.
Right.
Systema is kind of just you really just got to take like a different look at it because it's almost like some of these non-telegraph punches that aren't loaded up are actually more powerful in some ways. And the way George Pogasic explains, it's like, that is interesting.
It's anchored. So I have this anchored point.
Shit.
And
But I think a lot of people are going to be too close and minded and like, oh, he barely hit him. Like the guy's just acting. That's all fake. But anyway, that's an interesting guy.
Right.
And basically just, you know, your channel and me talking to Dan having you on his channel, it kind of like led me to Pogasic, which is kind of funny how this whole YouTube and martial arts world works, you know?
Yeah. I'm aware of the name, and that connection also almost happened for me. Like one of my viewers reached out to me and said that I should interview him, and I said, yeah, I'm interested. And he asked me if I would want my viewer to ask George, is the name right?
Yeah, George.
Right. To ask George if he would want to talk to me. And I think it's always nice when somebody connects people, because you feel like, you know, you already have that mutual contact. So I said, yeah, let's do it. And I never heard anything back, so I don't know what happened. But you know, the story is true. You know, what happened between you and me as well. Like I never saw that email. Then I sent an answer back. You haven't seen it. Like some stuff happens. Like you never know. You know, it's crazy stuff. And I think a lot of times it's human to think, to make up stuff on our own and to decide, oh, the guy hates me or the guy is not interested in talking to me. You know, we never know.
I got the funniest story, but go ahead. But I'll share the funniest story related to that.
Okay, let's make sure not to forget it. So yeah, essentially, I almost had that contact with George, not yet, but I'd like to. So it's somewhere on my list. I'll probably, after some time, if I won't get any answer, I'll ask again, or maybe try to reach him directly. Systema is on my list as well, and I am skeptical about it. I'm kind of cautious about it.
And I think a lot of people should be.
Right. I think it's there's a good reason why people are cautious or skeptical, but I don't have like a final opinion because I never tried it, and I haven't even made like an analysis. And this is the thing I do these days. I'm like, okay, let's do a thorough analysis. Let's look at the videos. Let's look what people say. Let's try to see like the outliers. So I try to collect the information to make the best possible informed decision. So I haven't done that yet. So I don't have that decision, but I did receive one email from a longtime practitioner who said, like Systema practitioner who also trains combat sports. And his consensus was that Systema with a good teacher can be great if you train combat sports, but on its own, it's not good. And again, I don't have my own consensus yet. I don't have that final opinion, but that's the side which I'm leaning to. Like I have a feeling that may be true, and I just want to confirm that. But yet again, I'm not sure. But there's one more thing which is interesting for me, and I was exploring Bujinkan these days, the ninja martial art, so to say. And the question for me is, because it seems that they lack pressure testing. Like that's not a common thing to do. Few schools pressure test, but some schools apparently do, or they claim they do. But there's not a lot of stuff out there of them doing it. There's one particular organization called Akban, which there's plenty of videos of them sparring and training, but they're not even officially a part of Bujinkan anymore for decades. But other than that, there's not a lot of videos. So my question to them, which is kind of the same question to Systema, I don't understand why these people don't feel the responsibility, especially if they make the claim like, oh, it can actually be practical, it can actually work, you just don't know it, you just don't understand it. I'm like, well, do it, go make videos, prove your point. It's possible to prove, put someone in an armor, let them attack you, find conditions under which you can prove that your stuff works and prove it. Like that's my mindset. Sure. And I have such a difficult time to understand. I think some of the people are just using it as an escape, as a kind of they can't really do it. They subconsciously know it, and that's the reason why they don't do it. Maybe some people can, but I still just don't get it. It's like, why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you put your stuff out there? And I think that's where I'm concerned about Systema, because it does have a bad name online. A lot of people make fun of it, especially in the circles that I gather my information in, or the places where I look at. And I'm just like, why, if somebody can make it work, why don't you make it public? Why don't you include the people? That's kind of the interesting part, which makes it even more questionable when somebody doesn't take on that mantle. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the Systema though is, like, I guess you really just have to experience it because, like I said, watching it, even some of the videos, if you look up George S. Pagasic, he actually does a couple Systema punches on Dan the Wolfman, and they don't look like much, but Dan basically says that punch was basically as hard as anybody loading up, and Dan's took some punches. He's taken some punches from some heavy hitters. So for him to say something like that, at least to me, it gives it more credibility because he's got his own reputation on the line. He doesn't want to just, put information out there and lie about something. Like, so what he says, because he's obviously very passionate in the martial arts, devoted his life to it, traveled all over the world, takes it really far. So for him to put his reputation on the line and said that punch felt like this, like, I almost have to believe it, and I thought of conversations with Dan and talking to George. That's why I'm on board without experiencing it, though I do want to visit them sometime and experience myself. But I'm willing to be on board, but I could see why other people in general wouldn't necessarily. But if they're not, I think they should at least be open-minded to it, because it does seem something like you do have to experience. You're not going to really see it visually so much because it doesn't look like much. And that's the whole point, though. It's non-telegraphic. It's very small movements, but it's a certain way of doing things. And, when and if you talk to George, he explains it perfectly. So it'll be a fascinating instruction, conversation. Right. And you have like a bigger audience than me. So I like to get George out there and people watching the videos, but somebody like you, and you have a different and a bigger audience. So I think it'd be kind of cool to get him out there. Cause again, he is such a fascinating guy. And I actually, I talk to him on the phone now, even post the Zoom thing. So I'm keeping in touch with him just about in general stuff. Right. So, we're like becoming friends, which is kind of cool. But again, another cool thing with the martial arts world and YouTube in general, like I've met a lot of people through having my channel that I'm developing like real friendships with, which is kind of cool, Yeah. Yeah. Oh, but my story, like you mentioned, whether these emails came or not, like, okay, so I sent you the email that you responded to, but I never got. So I just
responded like a month later. Maybe that was the problem.
Yeah, but again, I checked my my spam box, my whatever.
Okay.
Long story short, there's the I'm under the impression like, oh, he just doesn't care, or he just maybe doesn't reply to everybody, or I'm just under the impression, oh, maybe he doesn't even like me, because I made that video with the title. And again, kind of playing the YouTube game. Yes and no, because like the title, that is what the video is about, based on some of the stuff you said, based on Remy, which I like where it went because you and Remy had a really good discussion. And based on what some of the stuff you said about Remy, like, you guys, maybe if you never had a discussion, wouldn't really like each other, but I feel like you guys are cool now, So the end result, like, it's very positive, and it made for some interesting discussions like between our channels, But the funny story is, I remember the first date I ever went on with my wife, met her at Starbucks, had like a pretty good conversation, talked to her for hours. I thought the date went well. Okay. It was just a good conversation. We said our goodbyes. I had texted her the next day. I forgot what I asked her, but I never heard back. So I just assumed, and I'm not like the guy, like, here's the thing, like I will put a message out there, and it was a question, so it deserved a response, in my opinion. It wasn't just some comment, which, okay, maybe you don't have to reply to that. It was literally a question, and she never replied. So I'm like, okay, maybe she didn't think the date went as well as I thought. So I'm not going to send another text because I feel like I'm being ignored, Long story short, a week later, the next weekend, her plans fell through, and she calls me. And I had just gotten back from working out in the gym. I didn't really have any plans. I was just going to relax as I just finished a long workout. I was going to, watch a movie or something. But I was like, you know what? Yeah, I mean, I feel good. You get the energy after work. I was like, yeah, I'll go out. We'll see her again. And I brought that up. I'm like, oh, by the way, why'd you ignore my my text last week, or the question? And she said, what are you talking about? Like, I replied. And she showed me, there's timestamps and everything. Oh, wow. And so the thing is, sometimes they just don't go through. Like I had T-Mobile, she had AT&T or something.
Right.
And I for whatever reason, the text never came. But had she not called me the following week, so granted, this was like 10 years ago, and she ended up becoming my wife. Who
Right.
knows who I would be seeing or if I'd be married, etc. But it's just funny how like the miscommunication. I'm like, oh, she's ignoring me. Screw her. But it's just funny how that worked out, man. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, it's crazy, and I love that story because I think it represents that whole crazy side of the world we live in these days because so much communication is via text and messages, and even these days I sometimes question, I'm like, I should maybe start, but at the same time people are not expecting calls that much anymore, but
Yeah,
sometimes almost tempted, like, because I'm good with, like, if I meet people live, I can feel them, I can read their language, I can see if they're feeling good, if we can continue talking, and then I can make a conversation. But sometimes I catch myself, I write a message to someone and I don't get a response, and I try to start to think like maybe I said something wrong, and you never know because you're not seeing their face, and it's just like, yeah, it's a bit of a mess. But I've been in a few of those situations as well where I write a message, and like even with other martial arts YouTubers who I connected with, and it's like, and that same thought process goes through where you're like, maybe they hate me, maybe they don't like me, and funny
natural. Yeah.
too. I just remembered also on that kind of, on the subject of significance, uh, when I decided to interview Matt Thornton, which I mentioned. He's the founder of SBG, like a very big global BJJ MMA organization, and I knew that he's very much into critical thinking martial arts. And he was like, at the beginning, I could still feel like my channel is small and there's these people who are way beyond me. I didn't feel like up to their level. So Matt was one of those people where I was like, I'm not sure he'll be interested. Now I can play and put some leverage a little bit with, like, hey, my channel has so many followers and views and yada yada. It's like, come and talk to me. It's a bit easier. Doesn't
Sure.
always work, but it's a bit easier. But then I couldn't use that for leverage. And so I wrote him a message asking if he'd want to come talk to me for like a video conversation or audio conversation. And I really wanted to talk to him, but I didn't get a response. And I could have let go. And I actually never, we became friends eventually, but I never asked him about what really happened. But the thing is, he didn't respond. And then like a week later, very sincerely, very honestly, I wrote to him, hey, I realize you probably don't want to talk to me, but I'm because I really respect you. I'd love to get some feedback from you, because maybe there's something that I do that you don't like about my work, about my videos, that's the reason why why you don't want to connect up with me. So we can ditch the connecting up, but maybe you can offer me some feedback. Maybe, like, tell me the reason why my videos suck or whatever.
Sure.
So it wasn't the same phrasing, but that was the intention behind it. And right after that, he never responded directly to that. His next message was, "Sure, we can have a talk." And I'm like, up to now, I never talked to him about that. I don't know if that, because I kept guessing later, like, I wonder if that message, because he saw, now I know him, I know he appreciates honesty, authenticity, like integrity. So maybe that message was the selling point, unconsciously, it just happened naturally. Or maybe I just reminded him that I exist. I don't know. I never asked him, but that's kind of funny because, and the thing is, the reason I'm saying that's significant, because later I moved to the States to train at his gym with his help. That's where I had my first MMA fight, and he's the coach of Conor McGregor's coach, John Kavanagh.
Wow, that's
So
awesome,
that's the
man.
reason I got to train with John Kavanagh in Ireland. Like, so many things happened because of our connection. And again, it started with that message.